The cabin went silent when the man in the aisle said the words no one expected to hear. "Sir, please keep your hands where we can see them." The flight attendant's voice cracked. Not loud, not angry, just tight like a string pulled too far. The overhead lights hummed. Somewhere behind row 4, a glass clinked against a tray table, and no one laughed. The plane had not pushed back yet. The door was still open. The air smelled like coffee and new leather, and something sharp, metallic, anxious. Arthur Hale stood halfway down the aisle, jacket folded over his arm. Eyes steady, breath slow. 61 years old, grey at the temples, the kind of man who moved like he knew where he was going even when he stopped, even when someone told him not to. From seat 2C, a woman whispered to her husband. What did he do? From the galley, the purser. Elaine Parker watched with her clipboard pressed to her chest, lips thin, shoulders squared. She had been flying for 30 years. She could feel trouble before it spoke. This wasn't the usual kind. This wasn't a loud voice, or a drunk stumble, or a missed connection. This was something colder. Arthur had boarded early. He always did. He liked to settle before the noise, before the rush. He had nodded to the gate agent, thanked her by name, and stepped onto the jet bridge with the quiet confidence of habit. He wore a navy blazer, no tie shoes polished, but not flashy. He carried a worn leather briefcase with a brass clasp rubbed dull from decades of use. Inside were papers, notes, a photograph folded once, then twice. When he reached his seat, an older man with a red face and a voice trained by boardrooms had been standing in the aisle arguing with a younger flight attendant about storage space. The argument ended quickly. The older man sat. The flight attendant apologized. Arthur slipped past, took his seat by the window, and looked out at the grey morning. It should have ended there. But as boarding continued, something shifted. It was subtle at first. A look held too long. A question asked twice. Elaine approached Arthur's row with a practiced smile that never quite arrived at her eyes. "Mr. Hale," she said, checking her clipboard. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Arthur handed it over without comment. He had learned long ago that tone mattered. He had learned to keep his voice level, his movements precise. Elaine scanned the pass, then scanned it again, as if the letters might rearrange themselves if she stared hard enough. "This seat assignment," she said, "was changed late last night." Arthur looked at her. Really looked. He saw the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers tightened around the paper. "I checked in online," he said. "I chose this seat weeks ago." Elaine nodded, but she did not return the boarding pass. "We've had some system irregularities," she said. "It happens." From the aisle, a man in a tailored grey suit leaned closer. His cufflinks caught the light. "Is there a problem?" he asked already, smiling like the problem belonged to someone else. Arthur waited. He did not rush her. Silence can be a lever if you know where to place it. Elaine cleared her throat. "Sir, would you mind stepping into the aisle with me for a moment?" That was when the cabin began to listen. Arthur stood. He moved carefully, mindful of knees and elbows and the unspoken rules of close spaces. He stepped into the aisle. Elaine lowered her voice. "There's a discrepancy," she said. "Your name appears on an internal review list." Arthur felt it then. not anger. Recognition. A memory surfaced uninvited. A courthouse hallway in Ohio. A man in a cheap suit whispering into a phone. A door closing softly. Review for what Arthur asked. Elaine hesitated. For security purposes. The man in the grey suit laughed softly. "Well, that's concerning," he said loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "I'd hate to be delayed." Arthur turned to him. Their eyes met. The man's smile faltered just a fraction. "I won't delay you," Arthur said. His voice was calm. "I'm not the one holding the clipboard." Elaine stiffened. "Sir, I need you to cooperate." "I am cooperating," Arthur said. "I'm standing. I'm speaking to you." "What exactly do you need?" She glanced toward the cockpit. A look passed between her and the first officer, who had stepped into the doorway, arms crossed, eyes scanning. The flight attendant near the galley picked up the intercom phone and then set it down again, unsure. Elaine leaned closer. "We received a flag," she said, "from an external source. It requires clarification before departure." "External," Arthur repeated. "From whom I can't disclose that." The word "can't" sat between them like a locked door. Behind them, a woman coughed. Someone sichertled. A phone buzzed and was quickly silenced. The plane was full of people who had lived long enough to recognize when a simple thing was becoming something else. Arthur nodded once. He reached into his briefcase and removed a slim envelope. He did not open it. He did not offer it. Elaine's eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to his face. "Sir," she said sharper now, "please put that away." Arthur smiled just barely. "You asked me to step into the aisle," he said. "I did." "You asked for cooperation. I'm giving it. But you're asking me to accept a judgment without explanation." The man in the grey suit scoffed. "This is ridiculous." Arthur turned again. "You'll be on your way," he said. "Either way." Elaine's radio crackled. A voice came through low and urgent. "Elaine, we need a decision." She exhaled. "Mr. Hale," she said. "Raising her voice now until this review is resolved, I'm going to have to ask you to remain off the aircraft." The words landed hard, not shouted, not whispered, stated. Arthur looked around. He took in the faces. Curiosity. Relief that it wasn't them. A few flashes of sympathy. One woman near the aisle met his eyes and shook her head almost imperceptibly. "Off the aircraft," Arthur said. "Yes, sir." And the reason Elaine hesitated again. "Security concern." Arthur nodded. He folded the envelope back into his briefcase. He closed the clasp. The sound was soft, final. "Before I go," he said, "I'd like it noted that I have not been told what I'm accused of." Elaine said nothing. He turned toward the door. The first officer stepped aside. The jet bridge waited bright and narrow like a throat. As Arthur took his first step, a uniformed airport officer appeared at the doorway. His hand rested near his belt. His expression was polite and firm. "Sir," the officer said, "we'll need you to come with us." Arthur paused. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask for a supervisor. He adjusted his jacket, squared his shoulders, and walked. From her seat, Elaine watched him go. Her stomach tightened. She told herself she had followed procedure. She told herself flags existed for a reason. She did not tell herself why his eyes had unsettled her. On the jet bridge, Arthur stopped for just a moment. He looked back through the open door at the cabin, at the people settling back into their seats, at the man in the grey suit already reaching for his phone. Arthur took out his own phone. He typed a single message. 7 words. No punctuation. He sent it. Then he put the phone away and stepped into the terminal where the morning light waited indifferent and bright, and nothing would be the same again. The terminal felt louder than it should have, as if every rolling suitcase and boarding announcement had been turned up 1 notch the moment Arthur Hale stepped off the jet bridge. The airport officer walked a half step ahead of him, not touching, not apologizing, eyes forward. Arthur matched his pace without effort. 61 years had taught him how to walk beside authority, without yielding to it. The fluorescent lights flattened everything. Faces lost depth. The world became procedural. They stopped near a row of plastic chairs by a window streaked with old rain. Outside, the aircraft waited, nose angled toward the runway engines, quiet but ready. Arthur was told to sit. He sat. The officer spoke into a radio using short phrases that carried no emotion. Arthur listened to the rhythm of it, the way people sound when they believe the rules will protect them from consequence. Across the glass, a baggage handler raised a hand and laughed at something someone said. Life continued. That, more than anything, sharpened the moment. Arthur reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and removed his phone. No one stopped him. He scrolled once, then again, reading the same message he had just sent. It had gone through. Delivered. That was enough. A woman in a TSA blazer approached tablet, held like a shield. Late 40s, tired eyes. Her badge read Marissa Collins. She did not sit. She stood over him with the practiced authority of someone used to people shrinking. "Mr. Hale," she said, "we're just doing a quick verification." Arthur looked up. "Of what?" She hesitated. "Of a name match." "A name match to what?" She exhaled, impatient now. "There's a federal watch list review." Arthur nodded once. "Which one?" Her fingers tightened around the tablet. "Sir, I don't have access to that level of detail." "Then you don't have access to the reason I'm sitting here." She bristled. "We're trying to clear this so everyone can move on." Arthur glanced at the plane again. Boarding door still open. A line of passengers visible in silhouette. "Everyone already has," he said. "I'm the only one who hasn't." Marissa shifted her weight. "Have you traveled internationally in the last 6 months?" "Yes." To where Arthur smiled faintly. "Places that don't concern this flight." She looked at him, surprised by the calm. "Sir, this will go a lot faster if you cooperate." Arthur leaned back, crossing his ankles. "It always does," he said. "For someone." Her tablet chimed. She looked down. Color drained from her face, just slightly. She recovered quickly, but Arthur saw it. He always did. "Excuse me," she said, turning away. She walked a few steps, spoke quietly in her headset, then walked farther, putting distance between herself and him. Arthur watched her go, then turned his attention inward. He thought of Cleveland, of a winter morning decades ago, standing in a municipal building hallway, while two men argued about jurisdiction. He had been younger then, less patient. He had learned since. Learned that systems did not respond to force. They responded to leverage. Behind him, footsteps approached. He did not turn until a familiar voice spoke his name. Arthur. He looked up to see Elaine Parker standing there. No clipboard, now uniform jacket unbuttoned. She looked smaller off the plane, stripped of her narrow authority. Her eyes were uncertain. "I wanted to check on you," she said. Arthur studied her face. "Why?" She swallowed. "Because this doesn't feel right." He nodded. "That makes one of us." She flushed. "I did what I was told." "Of course you did." "I had a directive," she said. "It came through operations." "Not from the cockpit." Arthur's eyes sharpened. "Operations where?" She hesitated. "Atlanta." That was new. Arthur leaned forward slightly. Did the directive mention why Elaine shook her head? Just a code, a priority hold. He let the silence stretch. She shifted again, uncomfortable now. "Elaine," he said gently, "how long have you been flying? 32 years. And in that time, how many priority holds have you seen issued for someone like me?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. None, she admitted. He nodded. "Then maybe ask yourself why today?" She looked down. Her voice dropped. "I didn't know who you were." Arthur stood. Not abruptly. Just enough to bring their eyes level. That he said quietly is exactly the problem. Before she could respond, Marissa returned, flanked by a man in a dark suit who did not belong to airport staff. Early 50s, hair cropped close, shoes too clean for a terminal. His badge was clipped to his belt, turned slightly away. "Mr. Hale," the man said, extending a hand that Arthur did not take. "I'm David Rourke, with Homeland Liaison." Arthur raised an eyebrow. That escalated quickly. Rourke smiled without warmth. "Your name triggered a cross-reference." "With what?" "With a sealed matter." Arthur laughed softly. "You're going to have to do better than that." Rourke's smile faded. "Sir, you were present at a closed-door policy session in Richmond 8 months ago." Arthur said nothing. "You spoke with individuals under active investigation." Arthur continued to say nothing. Rourke leaned closer. "You were advised not to travel during review." Arthur tilted his head. "By whom?" "By counsel." "Which counsel?" Rourke straightened. "Federal." Arthur let the moment hang. Then he reached into his briefcase and removed the envelope again. This time, he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and an old photograph. Arthur held up the paper first, letting Rourke read the letterhead. The man's eyes widened before he could stop them. "That advisory," Arthur said, "expired 3 weeks ago." Rourke frowned. "That's not possible." Arthur turned the paper slightly. "It is when the review concludes." Rourke's jaw tightened. "No one told us." "That Arthur said is not my responsibility." Marissa looked between them confused. Elaine had gone pale. Rourke cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, perhaps we should step into a private room." Arthur folded the paper, returned it to the envelope, and slid it back into his briefcase. "I'm done stepping anywhere," he said. "Either you explain why my name is still circulating, or I make a call." Rourke's eyes flicked to Arthur's pocket. "You already did." Arthur smiled. "Yes, I did." As if on cue, Rourke's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. The color drained fully now. He stepped aside, answered, listened. His posture changed, shoulders stiffened, voice dropped. Arthur waited. When Rourke returned, he did not meet Arthur's eyes. "Mr. Hale," he said, "there's been an error." Arthur stood again, taller now, the weight of years settling into place. "Errors," he said, "don't happen by themselves." Rourke swallowed. "You're free to go." And the flight, Rourke hesitated. "That will be addressed." Arthur picked up his briefcase. He did not look at Elaine. He did not look at Marissa. He walked toward the exit, past the glass, past the noise, toward the daylight. Behind him, phones rang. Orders were given. Somewhere in Atlanta, someone realized a file had never been closed. Arthur stepped outside into the cold morning air, the sky low and grey, and allowed himself a single thought, sharp and clear. They had mistaken silence for absence. They would not make that mistake again. The car ride away from the airport was quiet in the way only expensive silence can be. Insulated glass sealing Arthur Hale off from the city as it slid past in muted greys and blues. The driver did not ask questions. He never did. Arthur preferred it that way. The radio was off. The hum of the engine was steady controlled. Arthur watched the streets roll by his reflection, faint in the window, older than it used to be, sharper too. 61 had not softened him. It had refined him. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. He ignored it. Let them wait. Let the anxiety spread outward like ink in water. Systems revealed themselves under pressure, and Arthur had learned long ago that patience was not passive. It was strategic. They turned onto a narrower road lined with bare trees and low brick buildings. Not downtown. Not yet. The driver slowed in front of a structure that looked unremarkable by design. No sign, no logo. Just glass concrete and a single security camera angled toward. The entrance. Inside the air changed, cooler, filtered, purposeful. Arthur stepped out of the car and walked through the doors without breaking stride. A woman at the front desk stood immediately. Early 40s, hair pulled back. Calm eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said. "They're waiting." "I know," Arthur replied. The elevator ride was silent. No music. Just the soft, mechanical ascent. Arthur adjusted his jacket, not out of nervousness, but habit. By the time the doors opened, his expression was settled. Neutral. Controlled. The room beyond was long and narrow glass on one side, city on the other. A table of polished wood ran down the center. 4 people stood when he entered. 3 men. 1 woman. All older. All experienced. All watching him closely. Arthur said the man at the head of the table, his voice low, cautious. "We didn't expect to see you today." Arthur set his briefcase down and did not sit. "That makes 2 of us." The woman folded her arms. Homeland Liaison contacted us 15 minutes ago. Arthur looked at her. And they said your clearance review was closed. Yes, and that your name was still being circulated. Arthur nodded. Yes. Silence followed. Not awkward. Waited. The man at the head of the table cleared his throat. That list, he said, was never meant to leave internal channels, and yet Arthur said it did. Another man spoke up, his voice edged with irritation. We've been careful. Arthur turned his gaze to him slowly. Careful is what you say when you don't want to say accountable. That landed. The woman exhaled through her nose. Someone reopened the file, she said. Arthur finally sat. The chair did not creak. Someone wanted leverage. The man frowned. Over what Arthur opened his briefcase and removed the photograph. He placed it face down on the table. Over history. No one reached for it. They didn't need to. They all knew what it was. 8 months ago, Arthur continued. I sat in a room with people who believed the system could be corrected quietly, incrementally. I warned them that quiet corrections threaten people who profit from disorder. The woman's jaw tightened. You're saying this was retaliation. I'm saying Arthur replied that someone mistook me for a loose end. The man at the head of the table leaned back. The airline incident, he said slowly, wasn't random. Arthur's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. Nothing involving 3 agencies and a corporate operations center ever is. Another phone buzzed. This time Arthur answered it. Yes, he said. The voice on the other end spoke quickly. Arthur listened, eyes unfocused, now mind moving faster than the room. When the call ended, he placed the phone face down. They've grounded the aircraft, he said. All 4 heads snapped up. What Arthur folded his hands. Operations halted departure, pending internal review. The woman stood. That's not protocol. Arthur looked at her evenly. Neither is flagging a civilian under a closed review. The man who had spoken earlier rubbed his temples. This will draw attention. Yes, Arthur said. That's the point. The city outside the glass continued to move unaware. Down on the street, people hurried to meetings, to lunches, to obligations that still made sense to them. Inside the room, a different calculus had begun. You're forcing a confrontation, the head man said. Arthur nodded. I'm clarifying one. Silence returned heavier now. At the airport, Elaine Parker sat alone in a staff office, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She ignored it. She stared at the wall instead. Replaying the moment Arthur had looked at her, the calm disappointment in his eyes. 32 years in uniform, and she had never felt smaller. Down the hall, supervisors argued in low voices. Someone mentioned legal. Someone else mentioned media. Elaine closed her eyes. In another part of the terminal, the man in the grey suit paced near a charging station phone pressed to his ear. His earlier confidence had cracked. His voice rose, then dropped. No, I don't care who he is, he hissed. I just want to get to London. On the tarmac, the aircraft sat idle, a symbol without movement. Back in the glass-walled room, Arthur stood again. I won't stay long, he said. I don't need to. The woman looked at him. What do you want? Arthur considered the question. It deserved an honest answer. I want to know, he said, who thought they could still move pieces without consequences. The head man sighed. That may take time. Arthur nodded. Time is something I have. Another phone rang. This one belonged to the head man. He answered, listened, then paled. Atlanta's asking for guidance. Arthur picked up his briefcase. Tell them to review their contracts. The man swallowed. Arthur paused at the door. Yes. You're turning a procedural error into a reckoning. Arthur met his gaze. No. I'm responding to a pattern. He left them there, standing in the quiet, surrounded by glass and regret. Outside, the sky had begun to clear. A thin band of blue cut through the grey. Arthur stepped into it, inhaled once deeply. His phone vibrated again. This time, he smiled. They were starting to understand. And understanding, once awakened, rarely went back to sleep. Atlanta woke to a different kind of morning, the kind where phones rang before coffee and nobody bothered pretending it was routine. In a windowless operations suite, buried deep inside the airline's headquarters, monitors glowed red and amber flight numbers, stacked like dominoes waiting to fall. Margaret Collins stood at the center of the room, heels planted, blazer still buttoned, even though her hands trembled. 57 years old, 29 years in aviation. She had seen storms, strikes, fuel shortages, and one near bankruptcy that aged her 10 years in 6 months. This felt worse. Say it again, she said. The young analyst swallowed. Ground delay program initiated at JFK. Secondary hold flagged at Dulles and O'Hare. Internal advisory pending. Margaret stared at the screen. Pending why? The analyst hesitated. Legal review. That word traveled through the room like a chill. Legal review meant lawyers. Lawyers meant exposure. Exposure meant blood. Who authorized the initial flag? Margaret asked. Silence. Her eyes lifted slowly. I'm not asking who sent it. I'm asking who signed off. A man near the back shifted in his chair. Late 40s, operations director. Good numbers. Weak spine. It came through as a federal coordination request, he said. We assumed compliance. Margaret walked toward him. Each step was measured, controlled. Assumed, she repeated. Did you verify? He shook his head. No. Margaret nodded once. She turned away. Get me the liaison office. Now. Across the country, Arthur Hale stood at a crosswalk, watching the light change. He did not hurry. He let the cars pass, let the city move around him like water around stone. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Yes, he said. The voice on the other end was tight. Arthur. They're panicking. They should, Arthur replied. Panic is honest. They're trying to trace the flag. Arthur smiled faintly. They'll find fingerprints. Yours, not mine. Arthur crossed the street, coat collar lifted against the wind. Tell me when they realize whose. At the airport, Elaine Parker's phone finally rang. She stared at it for a full second before answering. Elaine, a supervisor, said voice, clipped. We need a statement. Elaine closed her eyes. About what? About the removal. Procedure. Compliance. All of it. Elaine swallowed. I followed the directive. There was a pause. That directive may not have been valid. Elaine felt something hollow open in her chest. Then why was it issued? Another pause. Longer. We're trying to determine that. Elaine laughed, once short and brittle. So am I. She hung up before he could respond. Her reflection in the darkened screen looked older than she felt. She thought of Arthur's eyes again. Not angry. Worse. Disappointed. Back in Atlanta, Margaret Collins paced. The liaison office had not answered. Legal had sent an email full of words that said nothing. The CEO was on a plane from Dallas, unreachable. Margaret stopped pacing and stood still. "Pull the contracts," she said. The analyst blinked. "Which ones?" "All of them," Margaret replied. "Start with federal coordination clauses." As pages scrolled across screens, a pattern began to emerge. Not a breach. Not exactly. An overlap. A grey zone. Someone had used a legitimate channel for an illegitimate purpose. Someone with enough access to know where the cracks were. Margaret felt her jaw tighten. "Who benefits?" she asked. No one answered. "Who benefits?" she repeated louder. A woman near the corner spoke up. "The flag delays our departures, creates pressure, forces escalation. And who profits from escalation?" Silence again. Margaret exhaled slowly. "Find me the origin point, not the request. The motivation." At the same time, in a private office 2 floors above the chaos, a man named Leonard Price watched the screens with quiet satisfaction. 64 years old, vice chairman. He had outlasted 4 CEOs and buried 3 scandals. His suit was immaculate. His hands were steady. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew by memory. "They're unraveling," he said when the line connected. The voice on the other end chuckled. "That was fast." "Arthur Hale is involved," Leonard said. "He's forcing the visibility." A pause. Then, "We anticipated resistance." Leonard frowned. "Not like this." "You asked for leverage," the voice replied. "This is leverage." Leonard looked out the window at the city. "If this comes back to us, it won't be clean. It never is." Leonard ended the call and set the phone down. For the first time in years, unease crept in. At the airport, the man in the grey suit slammed his phone into his pocket. His flight still had not moved. His driver in London was calling. His assistant was texting apologies. He caught sight of a news alert on a nearby screen. A headline scrolled past. "Unexplained delays disrupt major hubs." His stomach tightened. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. A woman beside him glanced over. "Planes don't just stop for no reason," she said. He did not reply. Arthur Hale stepped into a small cafe and ordered black coffee. He stood at the counter, waiting. The barista moved quickly, nervous energy in her hands. She handed him the cup with a smile that didn't quite land. "Rough morning," she said. Arthur nodded. "For some people." He took the coffee and found a seat by the window. Outside, a news van pulled up. Another followed. Cameras came out. Cables unfurled like veins. Arthur took a sip. Bitter, hot, grounding. His phone buzzed again. "They've identified the clause," the voice said. Arthur leaned back. "Which one?" "The interagency coordination override." Arthur's eyes sharpened. That requires dual authorization. Yes, the voice said. One signature from operations, one from compliance. Arthur closed his eyes briefly. Names. A pause. Then two names. One he expected. One he did not. Arthur opened his eyes. The city looked different now. Edges sharper, lines clearer. "Thank you," he said. He stood, left the coffee unfinished, and walked out as the cameras swung toward him, uncertain, curious. Back in Atlanta, Margaret Collins slammed her hand on the table. "Vice Chairman Price," she said. "Get him on the line." In Leonard Price's office, his phone rang. He stared at it, the unease now fully awake. He answered. "Yes, Margaret." Her voice was cold. "We need to talk." Leonard smiled thinly. "About what?" "About why your signature is on a directive that just froze half our network." Silence stretched. Leonard chose his words carefully. "I acted in the company's interest." Margaret laughed once. No humor in it. "You acted in your own." At the airport, Elaine Parker watched as security escorted executives she recognized past her office door. The hierarchy was collapsing in real time. She pressed her hands together and waited. Arthur Hale stepped into the sunlight and raised his collar against the wind. He did not look at the cameras. He did not slow. He felt the moment cresting the pressure building toward something irreversible. This was no longer about a flight. It was about who believed they could still move in the dark. The boardroom lights came on one by one, not because someone flipped a switch, but because no one trusted the dark anymore. Margaret Collins stood at the head of the table as directors filed in coats, still on phones, still buzzing. The room smelled like stale coffee and cold resolve. This meeting had not been scheduled. It had been summoned. That difference mattered. Leonard Price arrived last. He did not hurry. He never did. He took his seat with the ease of a man who believed history favored him. Margaret waited until the doors closed. "We are in emergency session," she said. "Record everything." A secretary nodded, fingers hovering. Margaret did not look at Leonard yet. She looked at the table. At 7:42 this morning, a dual authorization directive was issued under interagency coordination. That directive halted departures at 3 major hubs and initiated cascading delays across our network. A director cleared his throat. "We're aware. You're aware of the effect," Margaret said. "I'm speaking about the cause." She finally turned to Leonard. "Your signature is on the authorization." Leonard met her gaze. Calm. Measured. "Yes." Murmurs rippled. "Why?" Margaret asked. Leonard folded his hands. "Because we were presented with a credible federal concern." "Presented by whom?" Leonard glanced at the others. "I'm not at liberty." Margaret cut him off. "You are in a closed session." "You are at liberty." Silence pressed in. Leonard exhaled slowly. An external compliance consultant. A director leaned forward. "Name." Leonard hesitated. It was brief, but it was enough. Margaret slid a folder across the table. "We already know," she said. "The question is why you didn't disclose your financial relationship with that consultant." Leonard's eyes flicked to the folder. His jaw tightened. "Relationship," he said carefully, "is an exaggeration." Margaret's voice hardened. You routed a directive through a channel designed for imminent threats to exploit a regulatory grey zone and pressure an outcome. Leonard leaned back. I protected the company. You exposed it, Margaret snapped. And you did it by misusing Federal Coordination Authority. A director raised a hand. Is this about the passenger? Margaret nodded. Arthur Hale. Leonard smiled thinly. A civilian with influence. A civilian, Margaret said, who was subjected to an expired review. Leonard's smile faded. That review was never formally closed. It was Margaret replied. 8 months ago. Leonard looked around the table. You're all acting as if I acted alone. The implication hung there. Margaret's phone vibrated. She checked it, then placed it face down. Arthur Hale is not asking for a settlement, she said. He is asking for accountability. A director scoffed. He doesn't get to dictate, Margaret cut him off. He already is. Across town, Arthur Hale sat in a small conference room with no windows and a single long table. The room was borrowed, neutral ground. He preferred it that way. The man across from him shifted uncomfortably. Tie-loosened eyes darting to the door. I don't understand why I'm here, the man said. Arthur studied him. Mid-50s, career compliance officer. He had spent his life saying no quietly. You approved a cross-reference without verifying expiration, Arthur said. I followed a chain. You broke one, Arthur replied. The man swallowed. I was told it was urgent. Told by whom? The man hesitated, then spoke a name Arthur already knew. Arthur nodded. And what did you receive in return? The man's face flushed. Nothing. Arthur leaned forward. You received insulation, he said. You believed the directive would be invisible. The man's shoulders sagged. I didn't know it would touch you. Arthur's voice softened just a fraction. It always touches someone. Outside, reporters clustered. Questions rose and fell like waves. Inside the airport, Elaine Parker sat alone, watching a live feed on her phone. The ticker scrolled. Executives called into emergency session. Undisclosed authorizations under review. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she did not recognize. Please remain available. She set the phone down. Her hands shook. Back in the boardroom, Margaret stood. We have two options, she said. We cooperate fully, or we let this metastasize. Leonard crossed his arms. You're overreacting. Margaret stared at him. You're underestimating. A director asked, underestimating what? Margaret took a breath. Arthur Hale is not pursuing this as an individual grievance. Leonard scoffed. Then what is it? Margaret's eyes did not leave his. It's a pattern exposure. Silence followed. Leonard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then froze. He read the message again, slower this time. Margaret noticed. What is it? Leonard swallowed. The consultant, he said. They've gone dark. Margaret nodded. They've been retained elsewhere. Leonard looked up sharply. By whom? Margaret did not answer. Arthur Hale stood from his chair and closed his briefcase. The compliance officer across from him looked up desperate. "Am I in trouble?" Arthur considered him. "That depends," he said, "on whether you decide to tell the truth without being asked again." The man nodded quickly. "I will." Arthur turned towards the door. "Good," he said. "Time matters now." As Arthur stepped into the hallway, his phone vibrated. He answered. "Yes." The voice was steady. "They're circling." Arthur smiled faintly. "Let them. They're going to offer concessions." Arthur paused. "They'll offer scapegoats. And you." Arthur's voice dropped. "I don't want people. I want structures." At the airport, a supervisor approached Elaine Parker. "We need you to come with us." Elaine stood, heart pounding. "Am I in trouble?" The supervisor did not meet her eyes. "You're a witness." Elaine nodded. She thought of the moment she had raised her voice, the moment she had chosen the easy path. The cost of that choice was coming due. In Atlanta, Leonard Price stood abruptly. "This is turning into a witch hunt." Margaret remained seated. "No," she said. "It's an audit." Leonard laughed. "You're letting an outsider destabilize us." Margaret's gaze hardened. "You destabilized us when you decided the rules were tools." Leonard gathered his papers. "I will not be made an example." Margaret stood. "You already are." Leonard stopped at the door. For the first time, something like fear flickered across his face. "He won't stop," he said. "You know that." Margaret nodded. "Neither will we." Outside, Arthur Hale watched the sun slide behind a line of buildings. The city glowed amber, then grey. His phone buzzed again. "They're preparing statements," the voice said. Arthur breathed in, then out. "Statements are for endings," he said. "This is still the middle." He slipped the phone into his pocket and walked on the noise of the city rising around him, the shape of the reckoning sharpening with every step. The news broke quietly at first, the way real earthquakes always do, as a tremor felt only by those standing on the fault line. Arthur Hale was already awake when the first call came through. He did not answer it. He stood at the window of his apartment, watching the river move under a low grey sky, the city still pretending this was an ordinary day. He had learned long ago that urgency reveals itself without help. The second call he answered. "They leaked," the voice said. "Selective. Framed as a compliance misunderstanding." Arthur closed his eyes. Of course they did. They're naming a mid-level operations manager, painting it as procedural confusion. Arthur's reflection stared back at him from the glass. Older. Calmer. That won't hold. "No," the voice agreed, "but it buys them time." Arthur exhaled slowly. "Then we remove time from the equation." He ended the call and turned away from the window. The apartment was quiet, spare by design. No trophies, no photographs on the walls. Power did not live in decoration. It lived in preparation. Across town, Margaret Collins stood in front of a bank of screens as the media cycle began to spin. Headlines softened. Language blurred. Words like miscommunication and oversight crept into the narrative like anesthetic. She felt her jaw tighten. "They're steering it," an aide said. "Yes," Margaret replied. "Away from intent." The aide hesitated. "Legal wants to know if we're issuing a statement distancing ourselves from Vice Chairman Price." Margaret did not answer immediately. She watched Leonard Price's name scroll across a ticker already shrinking, already being repositioned as an anomaly. One bad actor, one mistake. "No," she said finally. "We're not distancing." The aide blinked. "But we're not," Margaret repeated. "We're going to do the opposite." At the airport, Elaine Parker sat in a small interview room with a bottle of water she had not touched. A woman from Internal Investigations spoke gently, recording device on the table between them. "Take your time," the woman said. Elaine nodded. Her voice shook anyway. "I received a directive," she said. "It came through operations, priority hold. I didn't question it." "Why not?" Elaine swallowed. "Because I never had before." The investigator watched her carefully. Did anything about it feel wrong? Elaine closed her eyes. Arthur's calm face surfaced again. "Yes," she said, almost immediately. "Then why proceed?" Elaine's shoulders slumped. "Because stopping would have required me to choose discomfort." The room was silent, except for the hum of the vent. Back in his apartment, Arthur buttoned his coat and picked up his briefcase. His phone buzzed as he reached the door. "They're calling it a misunderstanding," the voice said. "They're offering reforms." Arthur smiled without warmth. "Reforms offered under pressure are confessions." He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. The city rose to meet him again. In Atlanta, Leonard Price sat alone in his office, watching his world narrow. The consultant was unreachable. The board had stopped returning his calls. His assistant had cancelled his afternoon meetings without explanation. He poured himself a drink he did not want. His phone rang. Unknown number. Leonard Arthur Hale's voice said calmly. Leonard froze. "Arthur." "You authorized the directive," Arthur said. "Not a question." Leonard recovered enough to bristle. "You don't get to call me. I just did." Arthur replied. "I want to be clear. I am not interested in your resignation." Leonard laughed nervously. "Then what do you want?" "I want you to tell the truth," Arthur said. "Publicly." "Completely." Leonard's grip tightened on the glass. "You're asking me to destroy myself." Arthur's voice was steady. "I'm asking you to stop destroying others." Silence stretched. Leonard imagined headlines, hearings, the long, humiliating descent. "They won't protect me," he said quietly. "No," Arthur replied. "They won't." Leonard closed his eyes. "Then why would I do this?" Arthur paused. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Because if you don't, the story will continue without you, and it will be worse." The line went dead. Arthur stepped out of the elevator and into the street. Reporters were already there, cameras lifting like reflexes. He did not stop. He did not acknowledge them. He walked until the noise fell behind him, until he reached the building with no sign and no logo. Inside, the room filled slowly. People Arthur trusted. People who had seen systems fail and still believed in repair. He placed his briefcase on the table and opened it. "They're controlling the narrative," one man said. Arthur nodded. "Temporarily. They're offering structural reforms." Arthur removed a document and slid it forward. "Then they won't object to this." The man read. His eyes widened. "This is a full transparency mandate." "Yes." "They'll never agree." Arthur met his gaze. "They don't have to." At the airport, the man in the grey suit finally boarded a different flight. Coach. No apology. No explanation. He sat stiffly, staring straight ahead, the memory of delay already hardening into resentment. He did not know his name had been logged. He did not know patterns were being mapped. Margaret Collins stood before the board again this time, with cameras waiting outside the door. "We are issuing a statement," she said. A director sighed. Carefully. Margaret shook her head. Honestly. The room stilled. "We are acknowledging misuse," she continued. "Not error. Misuse." A murmur rose. "And we are cooperating fully with an independent review." Leonard Price's chair sat empty. Across the city, Arthur Hale watched the press conference on a muted screen. Words formed. Faces shifted. The familiar dance of damage control unfolded. His phone buzzed. A text message. Just 3 words. "He's ready to talk." Arthur turned off the screen. Outside, the city moved. People argued over coffee. Planes took off and landed. Systems strained and adjusted. Arthur picked up his briefcase and headed for the door. This was the moment after denial, before reckoning. And it would not be wasted. Leonard Price arrived at the building just after dusk. The sky bruised purple and grey, the city holding its breath between news cycles. He did not use the main entrance. He never had. Tonight he took the service elevator alone, the hum of the cables loud in the narrow shaft. His reflection in the brushed steel doors looked unfamiliar to him, smaller, less certain. 64 years of accumulation had not prepared him for subtraction. Arthur Hale was already inside the conference room when Leonard stepped out. The room was spare. 1 table, 2 chairs, a glass of water set neatly at one place. No cameras, no lawyers, no recorders visible. That absence was deliberate. Leonard stopped just inside the door. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, forcing a thin smile. Arthur did not rise. "Neither were you," he replied. Leonard closed the door behind him. The sound was soft but final. He took the chair opposite Arthur and sat placing his hands flat on the table, as if anchoring himself. "They're pushing me out," Leonard said. "You know that." Arthur nodded. "Yes. They want a clean story." Arthur's gaze was steady. "There are no clean stories. Only incomplete ones." Leonard laughed, short and bitter. "You always did speak in absolutes." Arthur leaned forward slightly. "I speak in outcomes." Silence settled between them. Outside the glass wall, the city lights flickered on one by one, indifferent to reputations. Leonard cleared his throat. "You could have handled this quietly." Arthur considered him. Quiet is what allowed it to happen. Leonard's jaw tightened. "You think I woke up one day and decided to misuse authority? I think Arthur said calmly that you woke up one day and realized the rules no longer protected your position. Leonard looked away. They brought me the option. A way to apply pressure without fingerprints, and you took it. Leonard nodded. Because it worked. Arthur's voice dropped. Until it didn't. Leonard's hands curled slightly. You humiliated me. Arthur shook his head. I exposed you. Leonard leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Do you know what happens to men like me when the story turns? Yes, Arthur said. I do. Leonard laughed again, this time hollow. Then why press? Arthur paused. When he spoke, the words were measured. Because what you did was not about me. Leonard looked at him sharply. Then what was it about? Arthur's eyes did not waver. About whether institutions still belong to the people they claim to serve, or the men who learned how to bend them quietly. Leonard swallowed. You're asking me to burn everything. Arthur nodded once. Yes. Leonard shook his head slowly. They'll erase me. They already are, Arthur replied. This gives you authorship. Leonard closed his eyes. He saw the boardroom. The deference that had once been automatic. The assistants who now avoided his gaze. If I talk, he said they'll come for others. Arthur's voice was steady. Good. Leonard opened his eyes. You're not interested in revenge? No, Arthur said. I'm interested in correction. Leonard studied him. You always were. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Time indifferent, but relentless. What do you want? Leonard asked. Arthur reached into his briefcase and slid a single page across the table. A statement, he said. Complete, unfiltered, names, process, intent. Leonard picked it up, scanned it. His hands trembled despite his effort to still them. This is suicide. Arthur leaned back. It's accountability. Leonard laughed quietly. You think that still exists? Arthur's gaze hardened. It exists when someone insists on it. Leonard looked up. And if I refuse? Arthur did not hesitate. Then the investigation proceeds without your voice, and the gaps will be filled by people less charitable than I am. Leonard met his eyes. You won't protect me. Arthur shook his head. I won't shield you. Leonard nodded slowly. At least you're honest. Arthur stood. He did not offer a hand. You have until morning. Leonard stood as well, legs unsteady. You always did hate deadlines. I respect them, Arthur replied. They reveal priorities. Leonard turned toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, he said, not looking back. I never thought the flag would reach you. Arthur's voice was quiet. It always reaches someone. Leonard left. The door closed. Arthur remained standing for a moment, listening to the building settle around him. At the airport, Elaine Parker watched a press conference on a mounted television in the staff lounge. Leonard Price's name appeared in a lower third graphic. Her stomach tightened. She muted the sound and stared at the image. A colleague sat beside her. They're saying there's more coming. Elaine nodded. There always is. The colleague hesitated. Are you okay? Elaine thought of the question. I don't know, she said honestly. But I'm paying attention now. Across town, Margaret Collins read the internal memo twice. Leonard Price had requested an emergency appearance before the Oversight Committee. Voluntary. Unconditional. She closed her eyes. "It's starting," she murmured. In his apartment, Arthur Hale stood once more at the window. The river moved steadily, carrying reflections of the city's lights toward places unseen. His phone buzzed. A message from Leonard. Just 2 words. "I'll speak." Arthur did not reply. He did not need to. He turned off the light and let the room fall into shadow, the kind that comes before dawn, not after dusk. Tomorrow, names would be spoken. Systems would flinch. Careers would end. Some deserved. Some collateral. That was always the cost of truth when it arrived late. Arthur sat down, finally allowing the weight of the day to settle. He did not feel victorious. He felt resolved. Silence, he knew, was never empty. It was simply waiting to be broken. Morning arrived without ceremony. Grey light leaking into the city, like an unanswered question. Arthur Hale sat at his kitchen table. Coffee untouched, jacket already on. The television was muted captions, scrolling across the screen. Leonard Price's face filled the frame, drawn and pale, the confident angle softened by a night without sleep. Beneath the image, words flickered and changed as producers struggled to keep up. Voluntary testimony expected today. Senior executive to appear before oversight panel. Arthur turned the screen off. He did not need commentary to understand momentum. He felt it in the way the air pressed heavier against the windows, in the silence between sirens outside. Across the city, Leonard sat in a government anteroom that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. His suit hung looser than it had 2 days earlier. He stared at his hands, veins more visible, now wondering when exactly he had stopped recognizing them as his own. A staffer passed, glanced at him, then looked away too quickly. The respect he had worn like a second skin had evaporated overnight. A door opened. "Mr. Price," a voice said. "They're ready." Leonard stood. His knees protested. He ignored them. In Atlanta, Margaret Collins watched the same feed Arthur had turned off, sound up, volume low. Around her, phones rang and went unanswered. The operations floor had been sealed to non-essential staff. What remained were people who knew how to count losses and calculate fallout. Margaret stood still, arms folded, eyes never leaving the screen. Leonard Price took his seat before the panel. He adjusted the microphone. His throat worked. "My name is Leonard Price," he began. "I am appearing voluntarily." The room stilled. Pens hovered. Arthur imagined the sound of breathing, the collective intake of people who sensed a fault line shifting. Leonard spoke slowly at first, then faster, as if afraid the courage might leave him if he paused. He described the consultant, the back channel, the suggestion framed as precaution, the signature applied without scrutiny, because scrutiny had felt inconvenient. He named the clause. He named the motive. He did not name Arthur Hale. That omission did not go unnoticed. Questions followed, sharper now, more precise. Leonard answered them. Not all cleanly. Not all completely. But enough. In the airport staff lounge, Elaine Parker sat forward in her chair, hands clasped so tightly her fingers had gone numb. When Leonard described the directive as a calculated use of authority, her breath caught. She had told herself she was small in this, procedural, replaceable. Listening now, she felt something heavier settle in. So it wasn't policy, the committee chair said. It was strategy. Leonard nodded. Yes. And you understood the consequences? Yes. Elaine looked down. The words landed like a verdict, not of guilt, but of clarity. She had not imagined the wrongness. She had recognized it and chosen to move anyway. Arthur stepped out of his building and into the street. Reporters were already there, clustered, hopeful. He did not acknowledge them. He walked until he reached the park by the river, where the noise softened, where the city's edges blurred into water and trees. His phone buzzed. He checked it once, then put it away. He did not need updates. He needed space. In the committee room, Leonard's voice faltered for the first time. I believed, he said, that visibility could be managed. A murmur rippled through the room. You believed the system would protect you, the chair said. Leonard looked up. His eyes were wet. Yes. Margaret exhaled sharply in Atlanta. That sentence would be quoted. It would be replayed. It would be remembered. At the airport, a supervisor entered the lounge and called Elaine's name. Elaine stood. Her legs shook, but she stood anyway. The supervisor did not smile. We need you to give a statement, he said. Elaine nodded. I will. They walked down a quiet hallway, past doors Elaine had never entered before. Inside a small room, a recorder waited. Elaine sat. She took a breath. I received a directive, she began. It was marked urgent. I followed it. Did you believe it was right, the investigator asked. Elaine closed her eyes briefly. No, she said. I believed it was easier. The investigator paused. Go on. Elaine spoke of the moment she chose not to ask questions, of the culture that rewarded speed over judgment, of the way authority had felt heavier than conscience. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. In Washington, Leonard's testimony ended not with a flourish, but with exhaustion. He slumped slightly as the chair thanked him and recessed the panel. Cameras clicked. A staffer guided him from the room. He did not look back. Arthur sat on a bench by the river coat, buttoned hands resting loosely on his knees. The water moved steadily, indifferent to hearings and headlines. He watched a leaf drift past, catch briefly on a stone, then break free. A woman sat down at the other end of the bench. Older. She did not look at him. She stared at the water. Hard day, she said. Arthur nodded. For some. She smiled faintly. Seems like the kind that changes things. Sometimes, Arthur replied. In Atlanta, Margaret Collins gathered her team. We are cooperating fully, she said. We are not minimizing. We are not deflecting. A man raised a hand. What about the brand? Margaret met his eyes. The brand survives truth better than denial. Back in the airport interview room, Elaine finished her statement. The investigator turned off the recorder. Thank you, she said. This matters. Elaine nodded. She did not feel lighter. She felt aligned. Leonard Price sat alone in a car outside the building, hands folded, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed. Messages he did not open. He thought of Arthur Hale, of the calm certainty in his eyes. He had spent his career avoiding moments like that. He had mistaken avoidance for wisdom. Arthur stood and walked away from the river. The city resumed its noise as he re-entered it. He felt no triumph, only a steady resolve like a compass settling after a turn. That afternoon, the headlines sharpened. Names were added. Processes scrutinized. Words like accountability and oversight replaced misunderstanding. The story grew larger than any one person. As evening fell, Arthur returned home. He hung his coat, set his briefcase down, and finally poured out the coffee he had left untouched that morning. He did not sit. He stood by the window again, watching lights flicker on across the river. Silence filled the room. Not empty, but expectant. The kind that comes when a system has been forced to look at itself and can no longer pretend it does not recognize what it sees. The fallout did not arrive all at once. It seeped in, room by room, headline by headline, until there was nowhere left for it to hide. Arthur Hale woke before dawn. The city still hushed, the kind of quiet that only comes after something breaks. He sat at the edge of the bed and listened to the distant siren fade, then stood and dressed without turning on the light. He did not need it. He knew the shape of the day already. By the time the sun reached the tops of the buildings, the first resignations had been announced. Not forced, voluntary. Language chosen carefully as if precision could soften impact. Arthur read the statements without expression, noticing the sameness of tone, the way contrition was framed as stewardship, accountability as sacrifice. He closed the screen and set the phone down. In Atlanta, Margaret Collins stood before a smaller group now. Chairs that had been filled the day before sat empty. She felt the absence like missing teeth. The board had accepted Leonard Price's resignation overnight. No ceremony. No farewell. Just a brief memo and a line about cooperation. "We are not done," Margaret said to the remaining directors. "We will not pretend this was isolated." A man shifted uncomfortably. "The market is reacting." Margaret nodded. Markets react to truth like everything else. They adjust. In Washington, a second hearing was scheduled. This one broader, wider scope, more names. The committee chair had learned from the first momentum mattered. Delay was an ally of evasion. At the airport, Elaine Parker returned to work under a different gaze. Conversations stopped when she passed. Some avoided her. Some nodded small and uncertain. She accepted both. She took her position quietly, hands steady, voice measured. She did not know what would come next. Only that the ground beneath her had shifted and would not settle back where it had been. Arthur left his apartment and walked. He let the city meet him again. On the corner, a newsstand displayed the morning papers. His name did not appear. Leonard's did. Margaret's did. The Airline's did. Arthur moved on. He entered the building with no sign and no logo, and took the elevator alone. Inside the conference room, the familiar faces gathered. Fewer now, more focused. "They're restructuring," one man said. "Externally and internally." Arthur nodded. "Good. They want to consult." Arthur met his gaze. "They can listen." Another voice spoke. "There will be consequences beyond the airline." Arthur sat. "There always are." A woman leaned forward. "The question is whether this becomes precedent." Arthur folded his hands. "That depends on whether people remember why it happened." Across the country, Leonard Price packed his office under supervision. A security officer stood near the door, polite, impassive. Leonard placed framed photographs into a box he did not recognize as his until he touched it. The weight surprised him. Not heavy, just enough to register loss. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. He did not deserve the distraction. In the Oversight Committee's offices, staffers sorted documents late into the night. Patterns emerged where excuses had once lived, lines drawn, dots connected. It was slow, unglamorous work, but it carried a different energy now. Purpose sharpened by consequence. Arthur returned home as dusk fell. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window watching the river carry the day away. His phone vibrated. He checked it. A message from Margaret. "They want you present." Arthur considered the words. Present where? For what? He typed back 3 words. "I'm not necessary." He set the phone down. In the airport terminal, a delayed flight finally boarded. Passengers moved with the resigned patience of people who had learned to wait. Elaine assisted an older couple with their bags. Her movements careful, her voice warm. When the woman thanked her, Elaine felt the words land differently than they had before. In Atlanta, Margaret signed off on a press release that did not apologize without substance. It named failures. It named corrective measures. It named oversight. She knew it would anger some. She knew it would satisfy others. She accepted both outcomes. Arthur slept lightly that night. Not from worry. From awareness. Systems rarely sleep when they are being reformed. By morning, the narrative had shifted again. Not softer. Clearer. Analysts spoke of governance. Commentators spoke of trust. The airline's stock steadied, then dipped, then steadied again. Adjustment, not collapse. Arthur made coffee and finally drank it. At a cafe down the street, 2 men argued quietly about the hearings. One shook his head. "You can't let one guy bring the whole thing down." The other replied, "He didn't. It was already leaning." Arthur paid and left before they noticed him. In Washington, Leonard Price's name was spoken again, this time without his presence. Documents replaced testimony. Evidence replaced narrative. The committee chair closed a folder and nodded to her staff. "Proceed." Leonard watched the coverage from his living room lights off sound low. He did not recognize the man being described, though he knew it was him. Distance had a way of distorting memory. Arthur sat with his team again, quieter now. "We don't push," he said. "We don't gloat." A man nodded. "And if they backslide?" Arthur's gaze was steady. "Then the record remains." In the airport, Elaine clocked out and walked through the terminal alone. She paused near the gate where it had started. The carpet had been cleaned. The podium polished. Nothing marked the moment except memory. She stood for a breath, then kept walking. As the day ended, Arthur returned to the river. The water reflected the sky's slow change from blue to amber. He thought of the systems he had watched bend and break over the years, of how often silence had been mistaken for compliance. He sat on the bench and watched a boat pass, lights glowing softly, leaving a wake that spread then smoothed. The story was no longer about him. That was as it should be. Stories that endure rarely belong to one person. Arthur stood and walked home as night settled the city, adjusting to a new equilibrium, imperfect and incomplete, but altered all the same. Tomorrow would bring more statements, more reckonings, more resistance. He would meet them as he always had, quietly, deliberately, with the certainty that some shifts once begun do not reverse. The city did not announce the change when it arrived. It simply adjusted its rhythm the way places do after something fundamental has shifted, and no one wants to admit it out loud. Arthur Hale woke later than usual that morning, not because he was tired, but because the tension that had been holding him upright for days had finally released. He stood at the window, coffee warm in his hands, watching traffic move below with a steadiness that felt earned. Nothing dramatic, nothing triumphant, just motion continuing, slightly corrected. The hearings continued without him. Names were read into records. Policies were rewritten with language that could no longer hide behind vagueness. Oversight committees gained teeth. Not sharp enough to scare everyone, but sharp enough to be felt. That was how change usually survived, not as a thunderclap, but as pressure that refused to dissipate. In Atlanta, Margaret Collins walked through the operations floor for the first time in days without stopping. She listened instead. The tone had changed, less bravado, more care. People asked questions now before acting, not out of fear, but out of awareness. She knew it would not last forever. Cultures rarely reformed themselves permanently, but they could be reminded, recalibrated. That mattered. Elaine Parker stood at the jet bridge, helping board another flight, her movements precise, her voice steady. She no longer rushed decisions. She paused, looked at faces, listened fully. Some colleagues noticed. Some didn't. The difference no longer bothered her. She had learned something more durable than approval. She had learned alignment. At the end of her shift, a younger attendant thanked her for stepping in during a tense moment earlier. Elaine nodded and said nothing. Gratitude did not need witnesses. Leonard Price watched the coverage from a smaller television in a quieter house than the one he used to own. He no longer flinched when his name appeared. It had lost its power over him, replaced by something heavier and more honest. Consequence. He spent his days answering lawyers, writing statements no one would read, and thinking about the point where silence had felt safer than integrity. He did not excuse himself anymore. That at least he owed the truth. Arthur moved through his days without ceremony. Meetings, walks, long stretches of thought. He was invited to speak, to advise, to stand beside people, eager to frame him as a symbol. He declined most of it. Symbols were useful, but they were also easy to misunderstand. He preferred structure, process, the quiet work that outlived headlines. One evening, he sat again by the river as dusk settled, the water reflecting the city's lights in broken lines that smoothed as the current carried them away. He thought of the moment on the plane, the pause in the aisle, the decision that had not felt like a decision at all, only a refusal to shrink. He had not known then where it would lead. He had only known what he would not accept. Power, he had learned over a lifetime, did not announce itself when it mattered most. It revealed itself in restraint, in the willingness to wait, in the choice to act not for spectacle, but for correction. The world often mistook quiet for weakness. It always had. It always would. That misunderstanding was not his to fix. only its consequences were. Across the city, the airport hummed with its familiar tension and release. Departures, arrivals. Lives intersecting briefly, then separating. Somewhere in that flow, someone would make a decision under pressure. They always did. The hope, fragile but real, was that they would remember this moment. Not the names, not the headlines. The feeling of a system being forced to look at itself. Arthur stood and turned away from the river, heading home as night fully claimed the sky. Tomorrow would bring new conflicts, new tests. It always did. He welcomed them without anticipation or dread. Only readiness. Stories like this rarely ended with applause. They ended with choices repeating differently than before. That was enough. That was everything. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with these 3 words. Speak up always.